Welcome to the show. It's Monday, NASCAR. Boy, Rod, we were talking last week when we came back from the 2 week Olympics break. Got Rod Mullins here on the show with me, talking about the Richmond International Raceway Cookout 400. We were talking about how, and even in the weeks leading up to this, Richmond might lose its races on the upcoming year's schedules because of all the boring races. Yeah, just another boring race last night in Richmond. Nothing to talk about there.
Not really. Not really. But if you're
Except
if
for the
you're like
Hankies.
Joey Logano and you're crying this, and I mean that. Let me explain.
Hey,
I don't
Denny
want to.
Hamlin too. Denny
Yeah,
Hamlin,
Denny Hamlin too. Bubba
very
Wallace in
subtly.
there also. There were several. Yeah,
Everybody
this.
who had a microphone in front of their face, except for Austin Dillon,
Yeah.
could qualify for one of those napkins there, handkerchiefs there.
Um, I kind of agree with you. This race was boring up until about the last 30 laps. And then when Austin Dillon had made his move, it finally got around Denny Hamlin, and we thought, uh, yeah, at least my wife and I were sitting here. We were kind of talking about it, and I said, he's going to win a race. I said he's going to win this race, and I said he's been on a dry streak here for a while, a good long while. And then Ricky Stenhouse brings out the caution. Everything gets reset. Then we get a restart. When the restart falls, hey, Joey Logano got a clean start. He got a clean start on that restart, came away. I said, well, it's pretty much done. It's over. I think Logano is going to I think at one point there, as he was coming out of going into one, rather, he had got away from him, by several car lengths.
Yeah, he was.
And then as they start getting on the backstretch, that's when it seemed like that Austin Dillon was making his move a little bit. But then it's the call that's going to go down in history for a long time on this. One, he came at him going to the lower side of the racetrack trying to go, and he clips him, spins him around, sends him into the wall. Joey Logano hits the wall, and then Denny Hamlin, trying to avoid everything, he goes low and then gets clipped, spun around himself, and Austin Dillon wins a race. And it's full of controversy here at the end of it. And I mean, hey, controversy is our middle name here on this podcast. It seems, what we kind of generate on this kind of topic. And I don't know how, you and I were talking just a little bit before the podcast. You thought it was, a chicken crap move. I'm just going to keep it clean. You kind of thought it was chicken crap move, and I look at it in one regard. I'm like, yeah, I think that way too. But I kind of come back with this same thing too, that, Denny Hamlin and Joey Logano both, it's like we said, they're no angels. They're no angels out of this, but they're calling it like they see it. And Joey Logano's the one that's, mad to high heaven right now over this race. And who knows what the outcome is going to be. They gave the race to Dillon, but are they going to fine him? Are they going to take the race away from him, the win? I don't know what's going to happen. Elton Sawyer was telling the media last night, he said, we're going to wait. We're going to get all the information. We're going to get the radio transmissions, which you and I were talking also before this. The radio transmissions are going to tell a lot. I don't think it's going to be the replay as much on seeing it. We know what happened. But was it, can I say, provoked? Yeah, it was. I think it was. When you go and you get somebody, wreck him. When you hear that on the radio, that's clear there was intent. There was full intent to do that. There wasn't a thing of racing for position and just nudging somebody out. He came clear into him and he spun him out is what he ended up doing. But Logano has done that too. And I think I used the example of Logano going into Byron at Darlington here a couple of years ago and costing Byron a chance at winning the race there. Nobody really complained too much about that. Byron complained, but Joey Logano kind of got away scot-free on this. Well, we're going to have to wait and see, probably till tomorrow, and find out what's going to happen.
I would say racing hard is what you're supposed to do, just like in any other sport. Play hard. I mean, play to the whistle, everything else. But wreck him to get ahead is different than racing. Like if they were bumping, trading, swapping paint and bumping fenders and everything else, and it just happened that, hey, God, didn't mean to do that, but knocked him out, and then I went ahead and won. We've seen that before, not just on the last lap, but we've seen it throughout, like you said, throughout race, throughout the laps of race. But I mean, the audio from the team radio is just
Yep.
damning.
Yep.
wreck him, wreck him, wreck. And they said it twice, like when they synced up the radio to what happened, and you see, okay, one, they're saying wreck him, wreck him, wreck him with Logano in front, and then when
Right.
Hamlin goes under, wreck him, wreck him, wreck him.
Yep. So, I mean,
Racing hard is one thing. Wrecking a guy to win a race is different.
yeah. And I agree with that. But we're on a fine line here, as Elton Sawyer said.
Yeah.
Have we reached that line? Have we crossed that line? He was, being, a little bit more. I think he was being cautious because, if he says anything right now at this point, he blows the whole case wide open.
He prejudices whatever decision it is.
Yeah. And that's what's going to happen with it. And he said, you're going to have to give us till Tuesday. We're going to have to spend a lot of time on this stuff, breaking it down. I will say this. I mean, Joey Logano has never quite been one of my favorite drivers. I'll just put it that way. He seems nice enough, but there's times he seems so standoffish about some things. He crosses his arms. It's like, if you're going to come talk to me, you talk to me, hey, you got to ask for permission to talk to me and so forth. Denny Hamlin's quite the same way too. I mean, there's some of these drivers and stuff, and they feel like when they're in the media center, sometimes they've been forced. They're forced to have to talk about things, and there's things that they really don't want to talk about, but they're forced to do it. Austin Dillon, on the other hand, is trying to play to an audience hey, feel sorry for him. He hadn't won a race in so long. He's going on with this. Unfortunately, it also falls under the category too. He's granddad's grandson. And,
Granddad is Richard Childress.
And Granddad is Richard Childress out of it. And, this is a team that has been in transition all year. Kyle Busch finished in the top 20 last night, but still that's little comfort for somebody who, well, as Kyle Busch said, I think prior to the race, this next generation car doesn't help much on your wrist. He's injured his wrist somehow. He had to make a stop in the pits last night and have either a cast or something cut off of his arm in order for him to be able to drive, because Jeff Burton described it as, hey, I've had that situation before on, steering wheel, have a cast on and arm starts swelling. And when it starts swelling, it starts hurting. And so he had to have that last night. But, this was kind of the thing that everybody had been wanting to happen for Richard Childress Racing, because they'd had a terrible season so far, but not at the expense of taking the two front runners out of the race, so to speak, and then, winning that race.
So for people listening or watching on YouTube, depending on when you're listening or watching, we're recording this on Monday. So NASCAR promised a decision by tomorrow. Rod, I want to give you my assessment of what the decision is going to be. 0.001% chance, and I'm probably overestimating it, that they will take this win away. There's no way they're going to take this win away.
I agree with you.
Absolutely not. No.
I agree.
I'm not even sure if they'll do much of a fine, because if they fine him, that's almost like saying we should take the race away.
Yeah. And, and then I saw some media reports this afternoon saying, well, Joey Logano is going to get fined. What's Joey Logano going to get fined over? I'm like, the man spoke his mind. He said what was on his mind there following the race and everything. He felt like he had the race stolen from him.
Literally just a minute or two after it happened, too.
After it happened. I mean, he felt like the race had been stolen from him. Denny Hamlin, he was a little bit more statesman-esque, if you want to call that. He was non-controversial, but in a couple of comments to frontstretch.com and some of the guys that worked there as they were going off toward the pits, he did say that, it was a quote unquote crappy call. I'm not going to use the word, but he did say it was a crappy call. But then we got back to Chris Gabehart, who was Denny Hamlin's crew chief. He said, I've been involved in racing for 30 some years, I think about 27 to 30 some years. And he says, never have I seen something in that regard. I've seen people fight for racing. He said, but that was just, he said, I just don't want to go any further with it, except to say that, something just wasn't right with this whole thing. Me personally, what I think, like you, I don't think they're going to take the win away from it. If they do, then we'll both get back on here and we'll wipe the egg off our face, because I don't think it's going to happen. And I don't think
that NASCAR's ever taken a race away for something like this.
Yeah. And well, what did Denny Hamlin say? He said, they took a race away from him just for loose plastic.
Yeah.
loose plastic on his car and stuff is what they took a race away from him. And so 75 years, NASCAR has made some good calls. They've made some bonehead calls. And so we're waiting to find out what kind of call is going to come out of this, which I believe is going to be non sequitur. It's not going to even matter. It's not going to matter out of this whole thing.
No, no. I mean, the stakes of this, that you would be taking not only a race away, but a playoff spot away from a team owned by Richard Childress, one of the marquee teams in the sport. It's a down year for RCR, but it's a marquee team. But that said, that's the rock and a hard place that NASCAR's in right now, because on the one hand, I was telling you this, but for the listeners and viewers out there, before we hit record here, I watched the race and then I'm thinking to myself, all right, I would probably, my reaction would be nicer than, or not nicer. It would be a lot more than what you saw, even from Joey Logano. I would have gone over to the car and dragged him out by the scruff of his neck and beat the crap out of him. But that said, where was I going with that? What
you would have done out of the whole thing and stuff, and where it was going.
Well, and part of this too is the media. So, we're both media people now. You cover NASCAR, I cover basketball, baseball, football, some other sports. There's a cooling off period that is probably important that NASCAR doesn't have.
No,
that the other sports do. You don't get to talk, for example, to a basketball coach or to a football coach for 10 minutes. They go in, they vent in the locker room. They probably throw stuff around, the losing side, especially. They throw stuff around. They do whatever they got to do. Then they come out to the media and they've got it all out. All the bad stuff. You go over to Joey Logano. I mean, he's getting out of his car. He just got run through to lose a race, and then you put a microphone in front of his face. So the idea that he should be suspended or fined or anything like that for saying something that naturally happened, and it just happened a minute and with no cooling off. But then again, it's kind of good TV that the first words out of his mouth were, "That's chicken S."
Yep.
So
right.
It's good TV, but it's also it's not so good for the kids at home.
No. And that's who you're trying to attract to. You're trying to attract this younger base to get a little bit. And here we are talking about this. Elton Sawyer said, there is a difference now with the more established veteran driver who knows the ropes. And then you've got the younger driver who is doing anything he can or anything that they can to go and make a name for themselves. And Austin Dillon has been around the sport for several years. He's been around for a long time. I've got to give that much credit to him. You've got to at least say veteran. He's at least a veteran of all this stuff. But that was something that I think a young, inexperienced driver would have pulled last night. But Joey Logano said it plain and simple. He said, he can't drive. He sucks. He's always sucked when he's drove and stuff. And then I'm like, well, he's only won a couple of races that in some senses have been handed to him in such a way, or at least he's been there at the right recipient, the right time, and so forth.
And I looked up his stats today, Rod.
Yeah.
He's been in the Cup Series for 14 years. This year will be his 6th playoff appearance. He's never finished better than 11th. Now, and that's and that's considering that he runs for a well-funded team that puts great cars out there.
Yeah, and here we are again too. Here's a team that's just like we said earlier, and I've said this, they've been in kind of chaos is what they've been in all year. Gosh, what was it? He was 30-something in the points.
32nd,
was the way that, he was 32nd in the points. And I think I told you, I said, when we first started talking this playoff picture thing years ago and things, I said, all it takes is one win to propel you into the playoffs, and you're there. And you can be dead last. You can be Harrison Burton. Go to Michigan next week, and the Wood brothers put a car under him with Penske help, and he could turn around and win a race. He's in the playoffs. Guess what, folks? That's just the way that they've made it. They've made it to where somebody is either going to take advantage, they're going to get in the playoffs, and then they have to step up their game in order to be there for the next step of the playoffs. But
hey, they're in 3rd place on the last lap, and this is the only chance you think you've got to go to the playoffs. If you got to run through people to get there, you're going to run through people to get there.
Yeah, and hey, here's the other thing too. How many remember the move that Ross Chastain made at Martinsville? Wide open, coming through the turn, and, beats out Denny Hamlin, knocks Denny Hamlin out of the playoffs. I mean, that was a move that a lot of people was just like, no, you can't do that. But there was nothing in the book that said you couldn't do it.
There
And
is
now
now.
they've changed it. They've changed that, of course. But now we're at this situation of, oh, they're not going to change this, not because of, Austin Dillon going out here and wrecking these two here toward the end of it. No, I think it's going to be one of those things of where NASCAR is going to kind of sit back and they're going to say, that was racing, but racing, in a different style compared to what, we're used to seeing, at least having a little bit of a gentlemanly discussion, sort of like they do in wrestling, having a little gentlemanly discussion after that.
I remember the thought that I lost the train of
Okay.
a minute or two ago, and it was that NASCAR fans agree on nothing. Because there's
Oh,
30, there's 37 or between 37, 40 cars out there some weeks, and every driver's got fans. Every driver's fans hate somebody else or lots of other people.
mm-hmm.
So there's no unanimity or there's no agreement in NASCAR. I get on the internet last night. I get on Twitter right after the race. I'm trying to see if anybody else agrees with me. The first 100 posts I see are people. It didn't matter who they're rooting for. They
Right.
all thought that this was a bad way to see this race end, and that's emotions too from fans. They're going to still be
Mm-hmm.
fans next week and that kind of thing. But that's but it does say a lot that, and maybe I don't know Austin Dillon as because he's struggled in his career. He's not
Mm-hmm.
done great. There might be some people out there that think he's a nepo baby. That's the term the kids like to use about celebrities who, or the kids or grandkids of famous people. Maybe he hasn't earned his ride. Maybe there's a little bit of that kind of sentiment in
Mm-hmm.
there. But man, yeah, it takes a lot to get NASCAR fans to agree on something. They were agreeing on that last night.
Wow. Well, I mean, how would this have played out if our own Dale Earnhardt Sr. had still been alive?
Oh, the guy driving the number 3 car, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about this. And there are people out there that says, hey, he didn't deserve to even race in that car. That number 3 car was only for Dale Earnhardt Sr. and nobody else. Austin Dillon doesn't deserve. Well, okay, if they had done what, they have still kind of rumored at one point of Austin Dillon stepping up inside of Richard Childress Racing and then turning that 3 car loose to somebody else. And, gosh, heaven forbid they turn it loose and they move Kyle Busch into that car. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine what kind of brouhaha is going to happen over this whole thing? I mean, it's just a crazy thing. NASCAR fans are just, they're funny. They're fickle. I hate to say it that way, but it's jump on something, get onto it, beat it to death, and then let it go, and then jump on something else here a little bit later.
Imagine if it was Denny Hamlin who did that.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, the internet would have melted last night.
Yeah, and the boos were bad enough for Joey Logano last night because when he opened his mouth, the boos started. And Denny Hamlin was a little bit, I'll say it again, there was another cut too that I saw from frontstretch.com early today, and I was watching it. He had been to the trailer. He had been to the NASCAR trailer, and had talked to them. And he said he came out, and I figured, okay, he's going to spill the beans. And then he said, well, guys, he said, no, he said, I'm not at liberty to talk about it right now. And, I've told NASCAR how I feel about this. And he says, it's still a crappy move. And that's all I want to say about it. And he walked off, and I'm like, okay, I can tolerate that. I can tolerate that a lot better than I can tolerate hearing Joey Logano and things. But it's like I've got a kid that I had in school. He's a big Joey Logano fan. First thing last night, he was livid over the whole thing. And I kind of responded back to him, and I told him, I said, hey, it's not like Joey Logano hasn't done this before.
But
It's not like,
not at the end of a race, though.
but not at the end of a race and so forth. Then it's karma, it's payback, in certain ways, but not in that same sense like we're talking. It should not be that way.
Not even if it was at the end of the race, like I said earlier, if it was at the end of a race and they were just racing hard.
Right.
But, I think Logano made the point. It was a 4-car length difference, and he just didn't slow down going into the car.
No, he didn't. He was hammering it down through there.
He just, and if he would have somehow missed Logano, he would have just gone straight into the wall himself.
Right.
And who knows what would have happened with him in the three car, but I mean, he won the race. It worked out. I wonder. So, some of the folks I'm reading about commenting about this, the NASCAR
Hmm.
writers, are pointing out that maybe the wreck of Logano isn't as bad as the Hamlin because hitting him in the right rear like he did, we've seen guys
Hmm.
fined for that, not necessarily
Yeah.
suspended for that, but that's considered more dangerous by
Yeah.
NASCAR because of the way it knocks you off your balance there. What do you think about that? Was that the worst of the two wrecks?
Probably so. I mean, the right hook,
The right hook, yeah,
right hook, right hook. I mean, I know they kind of claim that to be a little bit of a boxing sort of thing, but yeah, you clip somebody in the right rear is what you're going to do. You can send them out spinning,
yeah.
just according to how you do it. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that was probably the worst of it. Joey Logano, I mean, fortunately for him, he kind of did some spinning there, and kind of the momentum kind of was going the other way when he hit the wall. But then Denny Hamlin, that was kind of a risky thing, even though there would be some people say, well, you went right down in front of him and stuff. Of course, he's going to try to go down in front of him. He's going to try to protect his line, what he can to get across the finish line is what he's going to try to do. And that's
And he's
that's
trying
called
not to
racing.
wreck too, yeah, because
Yeah,
there's
he's
a wreck
trying
rate.
not to wreck. So, I mean, this is going to be talked about, I think, for probably about the next week or two, and
Yeah.
then until something else happens. I think a lot of people are putting some things into NASCAR's corner right now and saying, "Are you going to go? Are you going to quote unquote? Are you guys going to have the balls to do anything about this? Are you going to stand up and finally do something about this? Or are you going to go back to the same old Big Bill France thing of have at it, boys? Let's
Yeah.
just race.
Yeah.
I don't care how you race. Let's just have at it. Hey, we're talking thousands, millions of dollars going into
Yeah.
these race cars.
Yeah.
And then they've got to go back and get that race car ready for next week, that frame and everything else that they're going to work on at Michigan. They've got to get, that sort of thing. They've got to get that engine. Everything has to be put back into place. Costs a lot of money. And, if NASCAR is going to cost these teams a lot of money, then they're going to have to pony up more in this negotiations and things like that with the charters coming up.
As we've been talking about, yeah, and you mentioned it, I think earlier, Rod. But I mean, the fact that a guy who was in 32nd going into the race now has a
Mm-hmm.
playoff spot. We've been talking the last few weeks about the cut line.
Right.
I think he's the 14th winner in the series this year.
Right.
So now all of a sudden, the number of spaces for guys who haven't won is dramatically reduced. It'd be one thing if you're talking about a guy who was just on the other side of the cut line. All right, he won his way in. You got a guy coming from way back in the pack that has stolen a spot. When I say stolen, I don't
Mm-hmm.
mean he really stole it. It's just kind of like he's a bid thief, like in the NCAA tournament sense.
Right.
One of those small conference teams that comes out of the eighth seed in their small conference and wins their tournament, and knocks somebody else out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's done that. He's done the same
Yep.
thing that a small college team does in March. Bubba Wallace ran a really solid race yesterday as an example. He was in the top
Right.
five most of the day. All of a sudden, his life gets a lot harder, among others.
Yeah.
This is significant in that sense.
Yeah, and that was the next thing I was going to talk about too. You had at least a cushion there for some of these guys. I mean, you had 13, you had 3 spots available. If one of the other drivers had possibly captured the win yesterday, it wouldn't have been so bad. There'd still been 3 spots open. Now it's dwindled to 2, and now Bubba Wallace has to race for his life for the next upcoming couple of weeks and so forth, or hope for a win. And they've been close here off and on through the season, but more than anything, they've got to win to get in, and that will seal up another spot, and then it leaves 1 spot there, and then I forget how it's going to go from there. Chris Buescher, I think there's Ty Gibbs, there's a bunch of them in there fighting for that spot. Kyle Busch is still like 122 points out. Kyle Busch, if he wants to make the playoffs, he's got to win next week. He's got to win for whatever's left of this regular season. And you got Michigan, you got Daytona coming up. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's down to the crunch time. And then you got Darlington. Yeah, it's crunch time right now for these guys that are especially on that bubble, and Bubba Wallace is one of them.
I quoted you the wrong number, Rod. There are still 3 spots open.
3 spots. Okay.
13 winners and 3 spots. But you're right about everything else there. I mean, Bubba Wallace right now is 16th.
Mm-hmm.
And he's 3 points ahead of Buescher and Chastain, who were tied for 17th. and Briscoe and Bush behind them. And so yeah, I mean that's the thing that's if not for Dillon's at 344 points, he'd be 26th right now.
Mm-hmm.
If not for that win, but those two guys who were tied for 17th right now will be tied for 16th if that's the case. So I mean, yeah, it just makes life a little harder and makes the last couple races here more interesting, I guess we could say.
Yeah, it does. I mean, if you're going to go to the stove and you're going to make eggs, you better make sure you can scramble them, because you can't unscramble them after it's all over with. And that's it. That's the situation here as we get closer and closer to the playoffs.
I think it's even more surprising, just because again, I said earlier, I'm watching those last because he led 35 laps. That's the first
Mm-hmm.
time this season that Austin Dillon had led
Yes.
a lap of a race. He led 35 laps, pretty much the last little section of that race. He was the dominant car until that
Mm-hmm.
wreck with less than 2 laps to go. He was cruising to a victory.
Right.
He had a dominant car. The only thing was he got outmaneuvered on the restart. Maybe I don't know. All the people on the final who were on the lead lap going into that went into the pits, got fresh tires. I don't know what happened there. It couldn't have been a mechanical advantage or anything else. It just had to be he
Mm-mm.
got outraced there off the line. But yeah, he in a sense he had the race almost taken from him and he took it
Right.
back.
Yep.
But that's what. Thinking back to those tires, how do you
Mm-hmm.
think that the teams had a choice and had to strategize their tire choices throughout the race? How do you think that played into how things went last night?
I think it played in very early with some of these teams of where they finished and how they were able to perform during the first part of this race. And I know there were people, again, you said it, race was kind of boring, up until this part and stuff. But you had the decisions were down to the very end of, okay, which tire am I going to use here? We're down to this. They go in, they make a quick pit stop right there with what time's left in the race. They really don't take on they take tires on and they go and they get out there, but the question is whether or not those tires made a difference one way or the other. If they made a difference, if they had a little bit better grip. It's commented last night that especially right before that caution happened and then Austin Dillon took the lead, he was loose, and he was having some trouble controlling the car. It's like, okay, is this the instant miracle? I don't know. That's something that's going to have to be looked at too. That'll be decided, I'm sure, by the crew chiefs, and then NASCAR and Goodyear will be talking about this of whether or not what kind of scenario are they going to play into by the time they start getting into the playoffs. Are they going to do this with the tires and so forth? I mean, it's just been this is a big week. This has been a big week for NASCAR to have to go through and have to wade through all of this controversy and everything else that's going on.
I look at the schedule, and this weekend's race is a day race, 2:30 in Michigan, and then the last two before the playoff cut line are both night races again.
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that I mean, I love the prime time,
Yeah.
or just before Sunday night, 6 o'clock starts a prime time for Sunday night. I love that it felt different, and I and maybe more people are talking about it because I think more people get to watch when it's later. I don't know why NASCAR still has these early starts because it seems like it cuts off the number of viewers you get.
Yeah, and I think some of this is going back to this continued, and I brought it up when I was at Bristol this past week when we had the big announcement about the Speedway Classic, which I'm sure you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But I had a talk with them about it, and I kind of said, I kind of look at this new NASCAR Major League Baseball thing as sort of like an alliance starting. And they kind of looked at me real funny, and it was kind of like, meaning? I said, well, hey, I mean, Roger Goodell is looking for 18 games on the schedule. They are right now in the midst of this thing. If they go and get 18 games, the Super Bowl is going to be moved. The Super Bowl is going to be, right after that, of course, but it's going to be on the Sunday, the same Sunday as the Daytona 500. So what are they going to end up doing? They're going to try to push the Daytona 500 to a week after and kind of tie it together. And I think that even though Joe Gibbs at one point had a close kind of association with the NFL where he had coached and so forth, they kind of tied it together there for a while. But they're as far apart now as they as they were, even in the beginning before Joe Gibbs left and came over to NASCAR. I think they're far apart on starting times and different things like that. NASCAR is pretty much having to schedule around sometimes football is what they're having to do, or at least make it to where they can be the showcase sort of race after the primary big show that's been on. It's starting at 1 o'clock and goes off. I think that's what they've tried to do, but it's coming back. It's coming back right now. And I think Major League Baseball sees that, and they see the possibility of an alliance together with NASCAR.
Boy, if you could figure out a way to make it not rain on that Sunday, you
Yeah.
could do the Daytona 500 at 1 o'clock on Super Bowl Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
That
Hmm.
wouldn't be bad, but you can't
That
guarantee
wouldn't. No, you
that.
can't. You can't
If you could
guarantee that
only
at all.
guarantee that, like put a big dome over it or something, I
Put a
don't know.
dome over it the same way Bruton Smith wanted to do a dome over top of Bristol Motor Speedway. And it's like, don't know if it's going to work or not. I know they thought about it. They
Hey,
thought long and hard about it.
and then they saw how much money it would cost. They said, no, maybe not. Hey, yeah, let's talk about the. It was you hinted to this last week. We had the early word that this was a possibility, but the MLB is going to be playing at Bristol, and the Atlanta Braves and Cincinnati Reds. You were there on Friday as this was being announced. Tell us what's going on.
All I can say is, wow, this is for a region, an area. If you've never had somebody that's ever attended a Major League Baseball game in Cincinnati or in Atlanta, and you live in this particular region or live up through the Appalachians, and for that matter, living up toward Shenandoah Valley and places, and you want to come see baseball and not go to DC to see the Nationals play or something, this is the perfect event. I mean, there's going to be seats galore. This is something that MLB had been discussing and looking at for, gosh, probably since the Battle at Bristol football game, the college football game that happened back, what was it, 2016, something in that neighborhood, I think 2015, 2016. And so Major League Baseball had approached Bristol Motor Speedway and said, how can we have a big event at the racetrack? Could we have a baseball game here? And they all had been talking about it for some time. Then, of course, COVID hit. That kind of put things on the back burner. But they've had so much success with the featuring, at least the salute to the Negro League teams that they had in Birmingham here a couple of weeks ago, the Field of Dreams out in Iowa. Gosh, I mean, you just name it. They've been able to pull off some big events and spectacular events. And why not take it to Bristol? And I think it worked out perfectly. Another reason I think that we probably, for at least a time being, will not get a college football game down there whatsoever is because all these teams are, they've got their schedules already firm in place. 12, 13 games is pretty much what they're going to now. They'd like to have at least 13 games because, hey, it can help them a lot toward the national championship. And then the other thing is, there's not a school that's going to pass up the opportunity if they are undefeated and they're playing. And then one weekend, we've got to go to Bristol and we've got to play a game that could hurt us. That could kill us before it's over with. So, the conference stuff, all this realignment and things that's being, thrown around and so forth. That's just the tip of the ice cube with this whole thing. And, but this whole thing about baseball, bringing it to Bristol, it's going to take a lot. Will take a lot of preparation. The guy from Roanoke that I talked about, he's already on top of things right now. He's, in charge of their field, their facilities, things like that. And they're already talking about they're going to have to add gravel down there. The field's going to be turf, but it's going to be authentic clay infield is what it's going to be. They've got some big ideas about this. They're going to have to tear some buildings out down there in the infield. One's going to be the Goodyear building, I think is the one that they were telling me about. They'll have to take it out in order to play the game and then put something back in place or move it in place and have it there ready for the September playoff race.
It's interesting. That's a lot of logistics.
A
Now
lot of
they've got time.
logistics.
They've got time between the spring and the fall race, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's a lot of work and a lot of expense. Now this is a track owner that's also put dirt down a few times, and
Mm-hmm.
he's willing to do that kind of thing. They're hoping to get. I mean, this would be by far a record in attendance. It'd be
Yeah.
150, 160,000 could be at this game. Scott German and Chris Graham from Team AFP want to be able to join Rod Mullins there, whether it's in the press box or out there among all the people. We've already talked about that up this way when the news came out. So, um, because if the logistics of this too, it'll be a Cincinnati Reds home game. Is that right? I
Right.
think.
They're going to go and they're going to play their first two home games in Cincinnati. That's a Thursday and a Friday night, Friday schedule game. And then on Saturday, they'll either board a jet or they'll get on a bus and they'll ride down, or probably Friday, I should say, probably after the game, they'll probably have to pack up and leave. They'll ride down, come down to Bristol. They'll play the game that night. It'll be on national audience with Fox. Atlanta, we're talking Cincinnati, probably about 5 hours. We're talking Atlanta, probably about 5 hours. So it's equidistance, between the two of them coming to Bristol. And it makes sense in a way. And again, it goes back to this thing. Eric Davis talked about it. Chipper Jones talked about it. He
Chipper
said,
Jones was
hey,
there.
Chipper Jones is everything and then some of what, you think of this legend of Chipper Jones. That's what he is. I can say this. Just like most all people, after they get 18, 20, 25, they put on some weight. Eric Davis has kind of put on a little bit of weight, but he has some great things of what he has to say about it. Hey, he hadn't rode around in a race car before until the other day, and then they got Chipper Jones, and Chipper Jones said, I'm at the so far I'm at the limit for the pucker factor. And that's what he was puckering, because he's afraid he's going to throw up going into the turns and so forth. But they're all eager for this. They're eager to showcase this, and they think it's just a great opportunity for Major League Baseball. And I mean, there's been an association, if you look at the Fenway Group, with Fenway Park and so forth, and the people that run the Red Sox, they are affiliated right now with NASCAR, which incidentally now has opened up. Heard this today. Don't know how this or what kind of direction this is going into, but there are some baseball teams that are thinking very seriously of getting some, I don't know, get an edge in there and get maybe participation in partial ownership of a team. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is one of those that's being on the radar. They're looking for people like that. They're also looking there are foreign investors. I hate to say that because that reminds me of just a Star Trek episode when they said foreign investors are coming in to go in and to put their money in at the Royale and so forth. Well, these same kind of foreign investors are coming in and they're wanting to get involved in NASCAR. They've seen it in Formula One. They've done it in Formula One, but they see this. I don't know how they're going to look at it now after Sunday night's race, though, but they're still going to say, hey, we'd like to get involved. But there are some Major League Baseball teams. Some of the front office is like, hey, let's go into partnership and see what we can do with this. So, it might be a win-win for both of them before all is said and done.
I think Chipper Jones, I don't know Eric Davis very well, like his mystique, but Chipper Jones seems like to me he would fit in with NASCAR, just because I remember, he when he was with the Braves, he owned the Mets. Oh my
Yeah.
God. It seemed like every year there for a while, 4 or 5 year stretch, it would come down to the Braves and the Mets in the National League East, and they'd play a series in New York, and he would hit several home runs and win games up there. So he memorialized his ownership of the Mets. I think he named his first son Shea,
Oh my
after Shea
gosh.
Stadium. He would fit in NASCAR, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, he certainly fit in down there Friday. And, a lot of people may know Eric Davis from a lot of stolen bases. He loved to steal bases for the Reds. Unfortunately, he's better known for the thing that still to this day burns me up. And it wasn't rubbing Shotzi hair on him or anything. It was him rupturing his spleen, I believe is what it was, in the last game of the four games that the Reds swept from the A's, trying to make a catch. He did make the catch. And then there he is. He's hurt. He has to go be laid up in the hospital. What does Marge Schott do? Marge Schott says, tell him to get his own way back to Cincinnati.
And
And I'm like, that started not only just my dislike of Marge Schott at running the Reds. It just, I mean, I liked Eric Davis. I just thought Eric Davis was always just a really good, hungry baseball player. And when he did such a great job during that four game sweep of the A's in the World Series, and then to make that catch, and then to end up having to be hauled back another way, or him having to pay his own money to get back to Cincinnati. I'm like, no, that's just too much. It was way too much with that.
And he was never the same after that. I'm looking at
No.
his
Mm-mm.
stats. After that, he only played 89 games the next season, 76 the next season. He had a 37 homer, 50 stolen base season. I mean,
Yeah.
he put some ridiculous numbers up until that, and because there for a while, you're thinking, I mean, first 5, 6 years of his career, this guy's a Hall of Fame guy.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then he ruptured his spleen. All that happens, and unfortunately for him, he had a couple good seasons after that, but it wasn't quite the same. But glad that he was part of that, and you got to be down there with. I know you're a big Reds fan,
Yeah.
uh, and Chipper. I grew up a Braves fan. I got to go to a lot of Richmond Braves games when I was in my teen years and college years. I remember seeing Chipper play in Richmond as a when the Braves were AAA there.
Hmm.
So they had some really good teams back before they eventually graduated to the Atlanta Braves, and so that's a great thing. And now seeing this game coming along is, I mean, it's gonna be exciting. I mean, just the idea that for so many people listening to this or watching this who live in Virginia or tri-state area, Tri-Cities area, we're all within a few hours of there. That we'll have a chance to be part of something historic because that's going to be the biggest attended baseball game ever, and will always be the biggest attended baseball game ever. That one game there.
I'm going to give you a plug. If there's anybody out there that like the Reds, but you've wondered where to find out information about the Reds and that it's spoken just plain and simple, I'm going to throw a name out at you, and you're going to probably recognize this name. Chad Dotson.
Yeah, yeah,
He is the head of the Department of Corrections in the state of Virginia.
yeah.
He is also an avid Reds fan. He has a website called The Riverfront. It's on Substack, and he writes occasionally some articles for Cincinnati Magazine. And he comes right out and he says it the way it is. He talks about the Castanelli family, the way he feels like in times they have just run the program down into the ground and so forth. That was the thing that amazed me. I was like, how in the world did they get such a, I got to be careful how I say this, tight organization, how they would go and they would feel about relinquishing a home game to where they could go and, go and play some other place. And I was really surprised Cincinnati, with the whole thing and stuff. Another thing that kind of bothered me too out of this announcement and so forth, what was going on was I didn't feel like there were a lot of Reds media there. There were a lot of people that were Atlanta fans, because of the location and so forth. But I would have thought there'd been a lot more Reds fans there, or at least some Reds coverage and so forth. I know Lance McAllister had mentioned a lot. I follow him on Facebook, and he had posted some things on there, and he's sports writer and has done some things for Cincinnati. And he was talking about, he says he thinks it's going to be a great thing. He thinks this whole thing is going to be great. It's just a matter of, how it's all taken care of within the next year. I mean, tickets are not out there yet. They won't be available until December. I was talking to a guy today who, matter of fact, had to come and do some maintenance on our heat pump. And he said, I'm a big Atlanta Braves fan. And he said, where can I get tickets for it? And I said, well, you can't get tickets right now. You're going to have to wait till December. And I said, your best bet is probably to go in and buy the 3-pack. And he said, the 3-pack. And I said, get both Bristol races and probably get the baseball game at a discount, a little bit of a discount to where you see all three of them. You might have to pay a little bit more out of it, but I think you'd stand a better chance of getting the tickets that way instead of the one-time thing. I mean, I think everybody's going to converge on this really hot and heavy, and it's going to go quick. Just like media spots. I think there's going to be a media press box down there, maybe hold up to about 40. But it's like there's going to be more people than that covering this thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, and I was talking with Anthony Vestal, and he says, we're going to try to go and we're going to try to take care of our local media. That's what we're going to try to do and stuff, because this is a big event. And I agree with him. This is something that, it may never happen again, may not happen for another 10 or 20 years. And we thought we were going to not have to wait so long for a battle at Bristol, but now we've got the Speedway Classic. And I think this is just a wonderful way. It's like I said, I've not been to a Major League Baseball game, and I want to see this game so bad because I like the Reds. I mean, I've just been a Reds fan, and the old days of, at night when they were on the West Coast, and I'd have the radio, and I'd have the radio in the pillow, and I'd be listening to the local radio station, WREM, and they carried the Reds at that time. And, we were talking, a friend and I were talking about the other night in radio, the days of going back and carrying these games live on the radio, not getting home till 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning because of West Coast games. Yeah. And he said, I hated those games. I hated those games with a passion. I'm like, yeah, I know what you mean, but still, it's baseball. That's just it. And I would just really, really love to see this game.
I'm fortunate that I've been. My wife and I go. Crystal and I go a couple times a year up to DC to see the Nats. Mm-hmm. We'll go up to Baltimore a couple times and see the Orioles. This year, UVA baseball played a game in Fenway Park, so Scott mm-hmm. German and I went up for that. Stayed another night to see the Red Sox play the Cubs, which was really cool. And I've been in high school. I was able to go to Wrigley Field for a doubleheader. Wow. Which was really interesting. So I've been to some of the great venues, but I tell you what, seeing 150,000 people at a racetrack in probably a one-time setting. I mean, I don't mm-hmm. imagine, I'd love it if it became an annual event, but
I would too.
A one-time setting with two iconic teams.
Mm-hmm.
The Reds and the Big Red Machine days, and the Braves, their great days in the 90s and 2000s. You got, two very passionate fan bases. They're relatively local to Bristol. Like you said, they're about 5 hours away each. The cities are. Lots of fans for both because of the radio coverage all those years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this will be a heck of an event.
It will be.
I got to be there for that.
It will be. And then what was it after they made the announcement? Yankee fans were all over the place. Why didn't they ask us? Yeah. Why didn't they ask us to come down and play? Well, that's one of those things of, how much are you willing to give up of your gate? Yeah. How much are you willing to give up to go to a place where you're going to be hated?
Well, why don't the Reds take
Yankee fans? Yeah, I know there's some Yankee fans down here and all, but they're kind of a minority out of this whole thing. So I mean, that's the way it was. That's the Reds were everybody: Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, part of Southwest Virginia, even up through Shenandoah Valley there at one point. I mean, there was some coverage there that got in there. And then, of course, you had the teams come in. Of course, Baltimore. That's when Baltimore kind of overlapped. You had Richmond, preferably on the coast right there, carrying the Braves banner there for a while. So it's kind of a tug of war between these two teams. And I think it's only perfect that they're going to have this at Bristol.
If I was booking like a wrestling promoter, I would book the Yankees.
Yeah, well, I know. I mean, guaranteed gate out of it. But, it's like, hey, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? Are they going to come in there and they're going immediately when they introduce Aaron Boone and the Yankees? Boo. That's what's going to happen with a lot of things. I mean, it's going to happen.
I would love to see that. I would love to see them in Southwest Virginia, Tennessee, right on the line there. I'd love to see the Yankees there getting showered with.
Oh gosh.
I mean, let's save that one for the classic too. So
let's do that.
Well, Rod, this has been a lot of fun today. There was a little bit of stuff in the race to talk about. We had some baseball to talk about. So, as always, thank you for your time and your insight. Look forward to talking to you next week.
We'll be talking next week about Michigan. That's where they're going this week. They're racing at Michigan in the Irish Hills. So should be an interesting race. We'll see how it goes, how everything transpires from Richmond over to Michigan this week.